come home and you say, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is coming to dinner. What do we serve this man, alayhi salatu wasalam? We know that he does not eat extravagantly, but we want to give him something that he likes, alayhi salatu wasalam. So for one, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam liked cold, sweet drinks, alayhi salatu wasalam. So he loved al-laban, he loved yogurt drinks, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He loved cold water that he would sweeten with honey, alayhi salatu wasalam. This was a hot desert climate, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's preferences in that regard reflect that, alayhi salatu wasalam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very simple in that he liked to have a bread of sorts, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he liked to rub it with something. He liked to put something on that bread. And whatever it was that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could dip that bread in, he was pleased with it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if you had honey, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved honey. If you had date paste, that was one of the favorite foods of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-hays. If you had only oil, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved that. And subhanAllah, even vinegar. You know, the Prophet ﷺ said what a good paste vinegar is. If all you had was vinegar and he took some bread ﷺ to rub and to put vinegar on it, the Prophet ﷺ would eat it alayhi salatu wasalam. When it came to the lamb, the Prophet ﷺ loved the shoulder of the lamb. And that's why you have the famous hadith of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, where she donated everything from the lamb except for the shoulder. She said, Ya Rasulullah, I saved this for you. And the Prophet ﷺ said, rather you gave away the shoulder in that you did not take the ajr, the reward of the shoulder, in sadaqah and charity, because the Prophet ﷺ loved to give what he loved most, alayhi salatu wasalam. Now, when you serve the Prophet ﷺ food, the Prophet ﷺ would never criticize food, nor would he overpraise it. So the Prophet ﷺ was always grateful. He never dismissed food. He never criticized food, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's not one single narration of him criticizing food. And at the same time, the Prophet ﷺ would simply thank you for the food so that he doesn't set a standard, alayhi salatu wasalam, where you expect lots of praise for the food. But if the Prophet ﷺ liked your food, then it was obvious, right? And there's a particular Persian neighbor that the Prophet ﷺ had, and he used to make a really good broth, a really good soup. And he used to give it to the Prophet ﷺ sometimes, and Rasulullah ﷺ loved it. Because he knew that the Prophet ﷺ liked this very particular broth, he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, Ya Rasulullah, come to my house and eat some of my soup. The Prophet ﷺ, he has Aisha radiallahu anha. He says, Wahadi, can she come too? He said, no. So subhanAllah, the next day, he comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he invites the Prophet ﷺ again for soup. The Prophet ﷺ said, can my wife come? He says, no. The Prophet ﷺ said, then I'm okay, I don't want to come. So the third time, he invites the Prophet ﷺ over to his house. And after he invites the Prophet ﷺ says, Wahadi, can I bring my wife? And he says, okay. The Prophet ﷺ says, okay, we're coming. And Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, he comments on this. He said that the Prophet ﷺ disliked attending a special meal without Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. So if you're inviting the Prophet ﷺ, you invite his wife as well. And this was, again, a very unique way of the Prophet ﷺ showing the consideration that he had for his family, alayhi salatu wasalam, in a society that really was not used to that. You also could expect that the Prophet ﷺ would bring along with him Ahl al-Suffa, the poor people that lived in the masjid, or the orphans or the hungry. The Prophet ﷺ would always bring his posse, and his posse ﷺ was the forgotten. And there's this beautiful narration as well, because if you had him in your house, ﷺ, wouldn't you want him to make dua for you, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you've served him, ﷺ. He's eaten your food. He said, Jazakumullahu khaira. You've established probably a new level of your relationship with him because you've had him in your house and he's eaten with you, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But you'd want his dua, right? And you'd want him to pray in your house. Like, how special is it to say that the Prophet ﷺ prayed in my house? And that's something so beautiful about him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he knew that. And so the Prophet ﷺ would pray in people's homes so that they could feel that connection, and they would take that place as a musalla, of course, and they loved that place. So the Prophet ﷺ would not just come to your house as a guest and develop a connection with you, but he would make sure that he blessed your house so that you always felt that connection, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether he was physically present in your home or not.